Well, a commission looking into child protection cases involving the Motherisk test lab say bad science tore vulnerable children out of more than 50 families in Ontario. The lab tested hair samples for drugs and alcohol, and the results were presented as evidence in those cases. But the lab and its methods were discredited, and it was shut down in 2015. So today, the commissioner in charge of the investigation made a number of recommendations to help families who've been affected by the lab's faulty work. CBC Health reporter Christine Birak has more. So tell us a little bit more on what we're hearing from the commissioner's findings.
Well, I've got to say the fallout from this Motherisk case has been absolutely staggering. Parents lost their children as a result of faulty drug and alcohol tests. In some cases, they lost their children permanently. Today we heard from that Ontario looked into nearly 1,200 cases where these faulty tests were used in order to make decisions in family court. Officials decided that there were 56 cases in which the lab test played a significant role in whether a child was removed from their family. Now, to date, 4 of those 56 cases, 4 children in those cases, have now been returned to their family. In 7 of the cases, a legal remedy has been found. It's not clear entirely what that means. It could be that there is now visitation happening, and in the rest of the cases, they are still up in the air. The retired judge who led the commission said today that child protection and the court systems have to be more careful about using expert testimony and expert evidence. She said there also need to be more supports for children and their families in the communities. Have a listen.
Most of the parents who were tested were powerless to resist. They told us that they submitted to the testing under duress in fear of losing custody of or access to their children. In some of the cases we reviewed, parents were told explicitly that this would be the consequence if they did not submit to the testing. People experienced the testing, particularly repeated testing, as intrusive, stigmatizing, demoralizing, and demeaning.
So you really start to get a sense of what these parents were up against and the pressure that they were up against. This went on for a decade and a half. As Arti mentioned, that lab was inside the hospital for sick children. People didn't question the results of these tests. It wasn't until a case back in 2014, so now moving out of family court and into the criminal courts, where a mother was accused and facing 7 years in jail for giving her toddler crack. And it wasn't until that time that investigators really looked into this test and decided this should not have ever been used in the courts at all.
And without question, of course, the hope would be that this would never happen again. So what are the steps that the Commission is recommending for the future?
Yeah, the Commission really had an incredible amount of sympathy and empathy towards the families. You could just see how stuck they were, where they were trying to tell the courts, I am clean, I'm not drinking, I'm not taking drugs, and yet these tests kept coming back showing that they were. So they were in a terrible situation that now the province is saying they want to avoid from ever happening again. The Commissioner issued 32 recommendations, including changes to legislation and rules on the use of expert evidence. In a lot of cases, there were workers from Motherisk who came to testify. We've heard from families who have said the testimony just went over their heads. It was mind-boggling what they were hearing about what these tests were implying about their lives. They also talked about strengthening parent representation during child protection proceedings, more education for judges, and measures to address racism in the child welfare system. They said a significant proportion of the families, of the 56 cases they determined, a significant proportion were Indigenous and African Canadian. The judge also recommended extending free counseling services to the affected families for 3 years. That's on top of the 2 years they're already receiving. But for families who have lost their children now, the adoption processes, those are so ironclad as well, that there are families, and the Fifth Estate has spoken with some of these families, who will never see their children again as a result of these tests. So Ontario now trying to take some steps, hopefully, so that this doesn't happen again.
A new chapter in an ongoing story. Thanks for this,
Absolutely.
Christine. That is CBC Health reporter Christine Birak.